and the World Refugee Day. And I am delighted to welcome our speakers, Mr. Arash Bordar, the Associate Education Officer at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, headquartered in Denmark, Mrs. Gerbasia Rodriguez, a Venezuelan teacher now living in Ecuador, Ms. Nadreen Jalabi, a Syrian student living in Turkey, and Rossi Kamayi, a Congolese student living in Brazil. Welcome all of you, and thanks for making time for this event. You can say hello if you want. And now I am going to present the agenda. I will briefly talk a little bit about why this celebration is so important for the Global Campaign for Education. And then I will give the floor to Arash Bordar, who will provide a kind of overview about refugees education and some of the critical challenges we face as societies to really engage refugees into education systems and protect the right to education. Then we will have the opportunity to hear and learn from the voices of 3 refugee women, Gerbasia, Rossi, and Nadreen. Gerbasia left Venezuela for Ecuador. She is a teacher and she has loved the opportunity to teach for many years and now is working in a completely different field in Ecuador. And Rossi is a very young woman who fearing child forced marriage in her country, in Congo, fled for Cuba and spent a year in Cuba learning Spanish, and then moved to Brazil, where she is living now and doing her studies. And finally, Nadreen Jalabi is a Syrian student who fled because of the combinations of struggle for her family to meet needs, and also because of the ongoing war in Syria, fled to Iraq for a year, and then come back to Syria, and after more struggle and more impacts of the war, fled to Syria, where she is now doing a master's degree. So as I said, this is a very important opportunity for the Global Campaign for Education to hear from the narratives and the experience of people who had firsthand fled because of violence and human rights abuses, and learn about what are the critical challenges of getting an education or enjoying the right to education away from their communities of origin, in some cases away from their families, and in a language they didn't speak before going into the country. So this is the very first thing, learning from the people who have really struggling to survive in the middle of the war and who had kindly accepted to share their experience with us. World Refugee Days is also an opportunity to show empathy and solidarity with the suffering of people who have often to leave their homes, their communities, and everything behind, and start a life away from their communities from scratch, and who are often really discriminated against just for being what they are, simply human beings as us, but because they have a different nationality and speaking different language. And refugees, sorry to say that, are often perceived as a burden for our societies. They are often discriminated against. So the Global Campaign for Education wants to stand for refugees, to recognize this as fellow human beings who deserve our admiration, our respect, and who are also willing to fulfill their dreams and to achieve what they want for them and for their families. So welcome Gerbasia, Rossi, and Nadreen, and all for us, and thank you for making time for this celebration. So over to you, Arash.
Thanks a lot, Luis. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Would you like me to share my screen? Or can't hear you, Luis, or should I do it myself?
Sorry, I was mute. Can you share your screen now?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. First, thanks, Luis, for having me. It's a great pleasure. Let me start by saying that it's It's a very important day and close to my heart. It's the World Refugee Day that we celebrate really the resilience, the success, and the beautiful stories that lies behind their status has given to many people as refugees and other forcibly displaced people. So it's a beautiful day to come and celebrate this collectively, especially when we are talking about education and access to higher education. My name is Arash Bordbar. As you mentioned, I work with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, based in headquarters in Denmark in the education section, but my focus is on tertiary education. I'm going to give a brief overview of the global trends, the numbers, some statistics about refugees, as you may all know, some of the challenges that refugees face in accessing higher education, the barriers, and maybe highlighting some important aspects of what we can do collectively to achieve some of the goals that we have. But before I start, let me just pose a question and ask why do we push for higher education for refugees? Why it is such an important topic that we talk about? We know about the benefit of higher education when it comes into return on investment. We know about the contribution that could bring for refugees to contribute to the host community economically, financially. But I think the other piece that is really interesting to know is when investing in higher education, it really enables refugees to break the cycle of conflict. It really helps them to become peace builders so that we do not continue with the displacement that is a growing number. Right now, we have more than 100 million displaced people around the world. That is a really significant number. And I think with education, we are not only able to help them build a better future, but really also to work with refugees and other displaced people themselves to bring solution to this conflict that we are all facing. As UNHCR, we have a strategy called the Education Strategy 2030 strategy. And for the tertiary aspect, we have set a goal of enrolling 15% of refugees into higher education institutions by 2030. And that is a goal that I think, of course, it's really ambitious, but it's more and more needed currently in the world that we are living in. Let me just talk about some of the statistics that we have. Currently, 68% of refugees have access to primary school. When we are moving into secondary school, you can see that the rate of enrollment has dropped significantly to half at 34%. And that is due to multiple challenges that refugees face into accessing movements, losing their certificate, gap in their education, cultural barriers, a lot of different barriers that I will go in deeper in the next slide. But when we are moving into higher education, that numbers reduces significantly to 5% of refugees having access to higher education, which compares to the global enrollment data that is more than 40% now. It's very low. And when we talk about that 5%, it does not mean that in all the countries, in all the locations that refugees are living, that number is 5% and consistent. In some countries, the number could be less than 1%, and in some countries could be 10%. But on average, the rate of the data that we are receiving is that only 5% of refugees have access to that. And we are hoping to increase it to 15% in less than 9 years. I believe that increasing that 5% number, the biggest part of it would be to change the policies, which would create more opportunities, to create more inclusive policies that allow refugees to have access to the same resources and pathways as any other young people. And when we talk about including refugees in the national system, it is best conceived as a continuum. So we should really be moving from that limited inclusion of access to short courses, resources, into a more deeper inclusion that is when refugees are in a country, they should have the same access to national institutions, to the resources, to services that are provided, same as other students. But not only to have access, but also to have access to the services so that they can remain in school and graduate successfully. Talking about some of the barriers, there are multiple barriers that refugees face, but some of it is similar across the regions. And if I wanted to highlight a few, one of the many barriers that refugees are facing is legal restrictions. In many countries, refugees are not allowed to have access to higher education or employment due to their legal status, and that is a massive barrier for them. A couple other are high tuition fees. In countries that refugees, even though they have the right to education, they are considered as international students. And that means that they have to pay a high fees to have access to universities. And that really is not able for many of the refugees, given the challenges and situations that they're in. Lack of certifications and the gap in education are the other barriers. In many instances, when refugees are moving from one location or from their home countries to a host country, they are not able to carry their qualification, or they're not able to obtain their qualification due to their protection challenges. But even for those that have access to their certification, recognition of their certification is the other challenge that would really be a barrier for them to continue their previous education, or recognizing their prior learnings. Remote locations, many of the refugees that are especially living in the camps or even in urban areas, due to movement restrictions or due to the distances, they're not able to have access to higher education. Gender equality, we know that, especially cultural expectations as well, many of the young girls and those that are living in the community are not able to have access to education due to the expectations that comes in with the culture expectation. And that is a huge disparity. Right now we have maybe about 40% of refugee young women that have access to higher education based on the data that we are receiving through a scholarship that we provide. I'll talk more into details. The other main challenge is also the lack of donor interest in tertiary education. Education is often asked by the families, the parents, the children, and young people as first priority in an emergency situation. But often it is the first service to be stopped and the last one to be resumed when a conflict happens. And many of the donors invest in immediate needs of refugee communities, but not really in a longer term investment for tertiary education. And that is one of the main challenges that we face, that as you see, many of the conflicts or emergencies that are taking place around the world are protracted situations, and they're not there to be solved immediately. So investing in tertiary education is also the other challenge that we are facing. But looking at the positive side, under the 15 by 30 strategy that we have, there are 5 pillars, 5 ways basically that we think you're able to have access to higher education. One of the one which has the highest potential, as I mentioned, is traditional or in-country scholarships. So where universities and national institutions welcome refugees as any other host community youth or non-refugee youth to get into the university. And we think that is where you will be able to create the biggest opportunities for refugees. The other one is DAFI, or Albert Einstein Scholarship, which is a program supported by UNHCR and funded by the German governments and other donors, which has been running. Actually, this year is the 30th anniversary of DAFI Scholarship, that has helped more than 22,000 students across the world, which provides a path and tackle all these different barriers that refugee students face, and enable them to have access to university in the country that they're hosted in. Another one is called Third Country Scholarship, or some of you might have heard of complementary pathways through education, which basically is a scholarship provided by a university in a country, for example, Canada, to a refugee student who is based in Malaysia, Lebanon, or Uganda, and they're able to travel because of that opportunity and continue their education. This is very limited, but this is also a great potential that we are trying to expand as we speak. The fourth one is connected higher education, which really is a mixed model of learning for you to have access to quality education, especially given the current situation after COVID. Multiple universities and institutions have moved into online modality, and that really enables a lot of the refugees to have access to these classrooms, and that really also helps to create a more inclusive classroom and system. And the last one is TVET, or Technical Vocational Education and Training, which again can be provided by nationally certified institutions to build skills and give young people tools that are needed by labor market, and really try to help them to gain knowledge, also to have access to the demanding opportunity that exists within the labor market. Can perhaps skip this one and talk on something quite interesting. A couple of area that I think we could work on collectively, and it really highlights different roles that different stakeholders play. The first one, which is really exciting and interesting, that I would like to highlight, is the role of young people. As we have seen, young people have really championed in bringing change in different aspects. When you look at the climate change, when you look at the gender equality, and I think for higher education as well, young people, students, both refugees and non-refugees, have a huge role to play in advocating for and increasing opportunities for refugees. They are the one that the university would listen to. They are the one that can campaign, can really lead, but also support and mentor other refugees and other young people that are left behind to have access to universities. And we have seen this model day and day to be increased. So I think that's a very interesting one that we want to talk about. The other one would be universities as agents of change. There is an interesting aspect, and let me know, Luis, whenever we are off time, and I would be able to, if I'm going
It's okay.
over time.
You have 3 minutes more.
Great,
It's okay.
that should be great. I think the other one that is really interesting is to realize the role that universities can play in changing the policies, in also creating that inclusive society. One of the main responsibilities of universities into bring that social impact into creating leaders of today and tomorrow. We are working with Times Higher Education. For some of you that might know, it's an agency that rank university, and universities basically have to, it's one of the main university ranking system that universities have to report against some of the work that they're doing, especially around sustainable development goals. And as UNHCR, we have been working to influence and change the language around inclusive classroom, around including universities, including refugees in the universities, or creating scholarships and pathway. And that is the other way we are trying to encourage universities, but also to acknowledge some of the work that universities are doing in creating pathways for refugees. I might just go quickly into the next one because we have 3 minutes. A couple of areas I think that are priorities for us to address some of the gap that still exist. One, I think, is girls' education. I believe we really have to prioritize girls' education and to enable us to get to the 15%. And that is really by prioritizing female application. That is making sure that you're providing enough support at secondary school so that we have enough qualified young women to have access to higher education. And that is really to provide targeted support, mentoring, and also to combat gender disparities within the community that they're based. Secondly is the secondary and tertiary transition. It is really, really important to invest in secondary education. That's one of the main areas that also has left out of the discussion. A lot of the support is on primary education, but for us to get into the higher education, I think we really have to emphasize the importance of investing in secondary education. So you have enough young people that they will be able to access. And I think thirdly would be transition to employment. It is really, really important, especially towards the end of their education career, to invest more and more in the skills, in internship, in opportunities that we can create so that when they are about to graduate or when they're graduating, they're able to get into the labor work and into successfully graduate and find a career that are really equitable and are linked to the study that they have, to the same field that they're studying, not just any jobs that they would be able to get. I would leave it here. I think maybe lastly, I would just highlight that education would really give a tool for refugees to express their potential, their agencies, and the talents that they have. And really by giving them the opportunities, not just knowledge, but refugees themselves have so much to offer to tackle also the situation and the conflict that we are facing in today. I will leave it here, and if there are any questions, I would definitely take it. And thanks again to all our interpreters supporting with the very speedy speech that I had. Over, back to you, Luis.
Thank you, Arash. Thank you very much for this very clear presentation. And I very much agree. Refugees are full of talent, and we are missing talent every time we reject or just deny the right to education for every migrant, displaced people, or refugee person. I was wondering if somebody has a comment or a question for Arash. Please feel free to open your microphone and make a comment or ask your question. If not, at the end, we will have time for a Q&A, so please make notes of your comment or questions and ask at the end. So now it's time for the second part of our session today. This is a live conversation with Gerbasia, Nadreen, and Rossi. I invite you to open your microphone and your camera if you want, and say hello, Nadreen, Gerbasia, and Rossi. What is the intention of this conversation? This conversation is to really get some knowledge and learn from the experience of refugee people, how they navigate the suffering and how they are able to transform their lives based on their own capacities and abilities. The second key issue is trying to understand what happened with people's right to education after fleeing conflict and human rights abuses, and after dealing with the process of learning a new language in a completely different context. What were then before leaving their countries, and what they are now, what they are doing, and what are the challenges they see, and they have been indeed navigating to secure a place in a university, as is the case of Rossi and Nadreen, and waiting for an opportunity for teaching again, as Gerbasia will share with us soon. Okay, so now I had some question for you all. I will just start in alphabetical order. You will have for the very first question maximum 3 minutes. Gerbasia, Rossi, and Nadreen, please introduce yourself. Who are you? Over to you, Gerbasia. Gerbasia.
Luis, ¿me escucha?
Sí, puedes hablar.
Ya, ok. Buenos días con todos y con todas. Gracias por la invitación a este foro global. Soy Gerbasia Rodríguez, venezolana. Resido en Ecuador desde hace 6 años. Docente de profesión. Migrante con parte de mi familia en Ecuador. Salí de mi país por cuestiones de salud y seguridad, pero principalmente de salud. En el momento en que salí de mi país, escaseaban las medicinas para enfermedades catastróficas y tomé la decisión, junto con mis hijos, de salir del país. He sido recibida en el país de acogida, pero no he podido dar curso a mi profesión de docente, porque cuando salí de mi país no podía traer los documentos que requieren los países en convenio con la Haya para registrar ante el CNC mis títulos. Soy profesora de educación comercial en el área de educación técnica. Soy magíster en educación técnica y al momento de salir de mi país estaba registrada para cursar el doctorado en educación superior, cosa que quedó inconclusa y que no he podido culminar porque por ser migrante nos centramos en lo prioritario, en las cuestiones álgidas que necesitamos para poder vivir en otro país como migrante o refugiado, y no da oportunidad para cursar estudios, si se quiere, de manera no costosa o gratuita. Y eso trunca parte de mi ser, de mi persona, porque soy una persona de 61 años de edad, pero con proyectos. Me siento todavía con mucho potencial para ofrecer en el campo educativo, en el área social. Pero para esto necesitamos estar al día, tener la tinta caliente, estar investigando en el área educativa. Siento que eso ha coartado mis posibilidades de crecer profesionalmente, porque en mi interior late el amor por mi profesión, por la educación, y mucho más allá de eso, veo con preocupación cómo el hecho de emigrar los docentes de Venezuela a todas partes del mundo ha dejado a mi país en completo abandono en cuanto al área educativa, porque somos personas, somos talentos por el mundo, talentos que algunos, muy pocos, la minoría, tiene posibilidades de ejercer y demostrar el talento que posee en el área educativa, pero que somos necesarios en nuestro país para la formación de las generaciones futuras que serán el relevo en nuestro país. No pienso en quitar oportunidades a los jóvenes talentos, pero sí siento que hay algo que hacer o por hacer en el sector educativo, tanto en el de mi país como en el de los migrantes que estamos en diferentes partes del mundo regados. Porque son muchos las personas, los jóvenes que han salido de Venezuela cursando carreras y han dejado sus carreras truncadas sin poderlas terminar. No estoy hablando de mí, que en el caso iba a estudiar un doctorado. Me estoy refiriendo al futuro, que son los jóvenes que han tenido que emigrar y dejar sus carreras a medias. Y tengo el ejemplo doliente y viviente en mi caso, porque mi nieta de 19 años de edad tuvo que truncar su carrera, abandonar su carrera en la universidad para emigrar, porque el compromiso era de todo, era salud la prioridad. Y no ha podido, ya hoy a 25 años de edad, no ha podido dar continuidad a su carrera universitaria. Vivo con ella el dolor de sentirse frustrada por no poder continuar sus estudios universitarios y no poder ser una profesional, porque ella, al igual que muchos, jóvenes esperan volver al país de origen, a Venezuela, y de qué manera van a regresar sin un título profesional que les permita ejercer funciones a nivel de Estado, de país, como profesionales. ¿Cómo regresarán? Y es el dolor que nos embarga. Regresarán como personas no profesionales, como un migrante que se fue y está retornando sin posibilidades. Y eso va a ser muy triste, porque la pregunta es, en el sector educativo, entonces, ¿en manos de quién queda Venezuela? Ofrezco disculpas si me emociona el tema y tal vez rueda una lágrima por allá, o de momento me ahogue, porque siento y padezco precisamente en el sector educativo la inclemencia o la desventaja de ser migrante para poder desarrollarse en esta área, y mucho más el dolor por el país que dejé atrás. Luis,
Thank you,
dime si continúo.
Gerbasia. Puedes parar ahí un poquito y ahorita te voy a hacer más preguntas. Now I will give the floor to Rossi. Over to you, Rossi. Please introduce yourself. Please unmute your micro, Rossi. Thank you.
Hello. I will speak French because I'm very comfortable in French. Moi, c'est Rossi. Je m'appelle Rossi Galula-Kamae. Je suis congolaise, donc de la République démocratique du Congo. Et ici, je vis actuellement au Brésil. Alors, je travaille dans 3 organismes internationaux, non, 3 associations en fait. Il y a un organisme international qui est comme UNICEF, je travaille comme volontaire là-bas. Et aussi, en même temps, je travaille dans une association des Africains dans la ville où je suis, Curitiba, donc au Brésil. Et aussi, je travaille dans une association de femmes africaines et étrangères au Brésil. Donc, je suis étudiante, je fais le droit à l'Université fédérale de Paraná. C'est une province, en fait, une province au Brésil. Et voilà, donc, tout ce que je pouvais dire. Je suis réfugiée. Je suis ici depuis 4 ans. Donc, j'ai dû quitter mon pays pour certaines raisons familiales. Parce qu'au pays, il y avait mon oncle. Dans chaque pays africain ou dans chaque famille africaine, il y a toujours un leader familial. Et là, il y a mon oncle qui voulait en fait m'imposer un mariage avec son ami. Quand j'ai refusé, et là, il a commencé à nous menacer, ma famille et moi. Et du coup, mon père a eu l'idée que je puisse voyager. On ne savait pas comment s'y prendre. Alors, il y avait aussi un peu de temps. Dès que j'ai eu mon bac, j'ai fini la 6e année. Et c'est là qu'on a cherché un moyen avec ma tante qui vit à Cuba. Et là, on a pu me ramener à Cuba. Donc, vraiment, c'est un peu ça mon histoire. Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Merci beaucoup pour la réponse.
Thank you, Rossi. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. And now over to you, Nadreen. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadreen Jalabi, 24 years old, living in Turkey as a refugee since 2014. I'm graduated from Mardin University, Department of Political Sciences and International Relations. Also now I am continuing my studies and I'm studying for master's degree at Istanbul, Marmara University, Department of Middle East. And I'm interested I'm interested in the field of researches. So I am also working at the research center here in Istanbul. And that's it.
Thank you, Nadreen. Now, this is time just to focus a little bit more on education. And I want to ask you, the three of you, whether and how displacement or migration has changed your education opportunities and the possibility to enjoy the right to education. Gerbasia, do you want to start? ¿Escuchaste la traducción de la pregunta?
No.
Okay, I will ask you in Spanish, Gerbasia. Por favor, comparte con nosotros cómo la migración afectaron tus oportunidades educativas y, en tu caso, tu posibilidad de enseñar y lograr tu doctorado.
La migración ha afectado mi posibilidad de estudio en la medida en que yo no he podido en este país. Bueno, hay dos causas. Una, el nivel económico, y otra, los trámites de documentos. Yo cuando llegué a este país vine con mis dos títulos, el de profesora y el de maestría apostillado, pero no traía el combo de nota, posición de grado y todo lo que solicita la Secretaría de Estudios Universitarios acá, CNC, para registrar los títulos. Ya esto era el primer impedimento. El segundo impedimento es que yo iba a comenzar mi doctorado, ya estaba registrada en Venezuela y no hay una vía de continuar el doctorado, no tenía una vía de continuar el doctorado a distancia, igual por la parte económica. Entonces, sí ha afectado a mi núcleo familiar, tanto en mi persona, por no poder continuar y no tener la posibilidad en este país de ejercer mi profesión, porque no tengo ningún título apostillado, no puedo ejercer, enseñar formalmente en el sistema educativo por no tener documentos registrados, títulos registrados, porque yo estoy regular en este país y soy residente permanente, pero no tengo los títulos ni en lo que corresponde a educación certificado por la CNC. Enseño en el sistema no formal, pero nada de lo que tiene que ver con mi carrera. Enseño acá, he aprendido emprendimientos, me he formado en emprendimientos y como tengo la parte pedagógica o de enseñanza como profesión, lo sumo con el emprendimiento de confección, de costura, y doy clases en una academia privada de corte y confección, de patronaje de corte y confección. Por ahí he podido drenar un poco la frustración de no ejercer mi carrera como docente. Pero no es mi ámbito de estudio donde me estoy desenvolviendo. ¿Algo más que pudiera aportar? No sé.
Está bien, Gerbasia. It is really interesting, Gerbasia, how you just sharing your life experience really relate with what Arash Bordat has highlighted previously. You are talking about that of certifications, problems to afford the tuition fees, legal restrictions to teach in the country. So this is really helpful. Thank you very much for sharing this. And now, Rossi, do you want to address my question? I will repeat the question: whether and how displacement has shaped the opportunity to achieve your title or your academic aspirations.
Thank you for the question. En fait, les difficultés que j'ai eu à rencontrer par rapport à la migration, c'était que quand j'ai quitté mon pays, j'ai quitté le Congo, comme je vous ai dit, d'une manière brutale, pour aller à Cuba. Alors, arrivé là-bas, je ne pouvais pas continuer mes études comme il se doit. Parce que d'abord, je n'avais pas, l'objectif, ce n'était pas de continuer les études, c'était d'abord de chercher une sécurité. Et arrivé là-bas, j'ai dû d'abord faire la langue espagnole, étudier pour un temps. Et après ça, je n'ai pas pu étudier. Je suis venue ici au Brésil. Je suis restée comme 4 ans sans étudier, donc pendant un long moment sans étudier. Et ça fait comme... ça m'a vraiment affaibli, ça a affaibli comme mon mental, en fait. Mais après, il fallait apprendre la langue portugaise pour que je m'adapte plus facilement lorsque je serai à l'université. Mais je n'ai pas pu aussi m'adapter d'une manière prompte. Donc, c'était aussi quand même difficile pour moi de m'adapter à l'université, vu que c'est un autre système académique que celui où j'étais dans mon pays. Donc, c'est vraiment au niveau de la langue. Parce que moi, naturellement, je parle français. Et ici, au Brésil, c'est la langue portugaise. I don't know if you understand. Do you understand? Moi, en fait, c'est vraiment au niveau de la langue portugaise.
Thank you very much. And now, Nadreen, do you want to address my question, please?
Yeah, actually, first, I left Syria 2 times, and I lived the refugee experience 2 times. The first was when I went to Iraq in 2012. I left Syria because of some reasons. One of them, that there was a lot of kidnapping cases. Also, there was a lack of necessities of the necessities of the life. So we left Syria in 2012 to Iraq, and I dropped out from school almost for a year. Then I was in the secondary school. Then, because of education, I returned to Syria to continue my studies in Syria. So my family also decided to follow me to Syria. We stayed to Syria about a year also, and in 2014 we left Syria to Turkey. And here I started from the beginning. In 2014, I was in the high school, and I started, first I started learning Turkish. Then I started the high school, then the second part, which is university, and now master's degree.
Thank you, Nadreen. I am so impressed with the ability of Rossi and Nadreen to learn different languages and to adapt to a very different cultures. First going to Cuba in the case of Rossi and learning Spanish, and then go to Brazil and start a new language, learning Portuguese to do your studies. So language is one of the critical issues. And yes, in our previous conversation, Nadreen, I was so impressed. You were speaking so many languages to adapt to the culture as a Kurdish woman learning in Iraq, and then moving back to Syria, and now in Turkey learning in Turkish. So that is just brilliant. My next question is related to this kind of issues. What are the main challenges? And also the question is also for you, Gerbasia. I know you moved from Venezuela and Ecuador and in the same language, but beyond the language, what are the main critical issues for refugees and migrants to adapt to the new context and learn in a new culture, in a different curriculum, maybe, I don't know. Please share with us what are those challenges beyond the language. This time, I will start with Nadreen. Go ahead, Nadreen.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Yes, I was asking what were the main challenges for you to resume your education beyond the language.
Actually, the first challenge was we were moving between countries. You know, we went to Iraq, and I couldn't resume my education there. Then I decided to stay in Syria and continue my studies. The condition and the general condition wasn't safe anymore to live there, so I should have leave Syria. So we left. So the first thing, it was moving between countries, and moving between countries, it means moving between cultures, societies. It's a different culture, different society, different language, different education system. So when we came to Turkey, first thing I did, it was learning Turkish and learning the system of education in Turkey. How can I pass? Which exam I have to pass to go to university, and which exams I have to pass, to which languages I have to know to doing a master degree. So this is the first thing. The next thing is instability of our lives. As a refugee, your life is not stable. You can't do a decision which is will change your whole life. So we are unstable here, and we always thinking about return to Syria and the Syria's condition in future, and how can I use these knowledge to build my country, you know. Yeah, that's it. And also the most important thing is the adaptation for any refugee. It's the main challenge.
Thank you, Nadreen. Thank you very much for sharing all of this. Very important indeed. Over to you, Rossi.
Thank you. Moi, j'aimerais aussi m'appuyer sur ce qu'elle vient de dire. C'est vraiment très important, en fait, parce que l'instabilité, ça arrive vraiment dans la vie de beaucoup de réfugiés. Parce que quand tu quittes de ton pays d'une manière forcée, tu arrives dans notre pays, il faut d'abord chercher à t'adapter au système, pour les étudiants, au système académique, tu dois t'adapter aussi à l'environnement, chercher des amis. Ce n'est pas facile, en fait, de s'adapter, parce que d'abord, tu laisses ta famille loin de tout ça, en fait. Imagine, moi, je suis ici au Brésil, très loin de ma famille qui est là-bas au pays, au Congo. Donc, vraiment, il y a la mer Méditerranée, donc la mer Atlantique qui nous sépare, en fait, l'océan Atlantique qui nous sépare. Déjà, c'est vraiment très loin. Et je me rappelle même quand j'ai quitté mon pays, je suis allée à Cuba, il m'arrivait des fois où j'ai pleuré, en fait. J'ai pleuré, là, j'étais en train de pleurer. J'appelais maman, maman, j'ai besoin de toi, tu me manques et tout. Et ma mère me disait, tranquille, toi, ça va aller et tout. Mais déjà aussi, nous, les Africains, on n'a pas vraiment cette habitude-là de voir les psychologues. Parce qu'on me disait même d'aller voir une personne à qui me confier. Tellement que je faisais comme une crise de dépression. Il y avait ma mère qui me manquait, mon père qui me manquait, mes frères qui me manquaient. Donc, vraiment, ce n'était pas facile pour moi. Donc, c'est vraiment ce côté-là, l'instabilité. Et quand cette instabilité vient, ça amène aussi l'instabilité de tous les domaines. Donc, instabilité émotionnelle, instabilité financière, instabilité dans beaucoup de choses, en fait. Donc, vraiment, ce point-là, c'est vraiment un point capital. Moi aussi, j'ai rencontré ça.
Thank you, Rossi. I have a question for you. Have you received any mental support, psychological support in your university?
Non, je ne reçois pas de support psychologique. En fait, à l'époque, quand j'étais arrivée à Cuba, donc j'ai quitté récemment mon pays. Là, je pleurais tout le temps et tout ça. Et en ce moment-là, avec ma tante qui me conseillait, qui me consolait et tout. Mais arrivée ici, je me suis déjà habituée, donc loin de ma famille, loin de toutes les personnes qui étaient comme mes leaders, en fait, mes responsables. Donc, je n'ai pas de support, donc une personne à qui parler de mes problèmes, de mes difficultés. Non, je me gère moi-même actuellement. Bien que j'ai mes cousines avec moi, mais je me gère moi-même, vu que j'ai grandi déjà.
I'm sorry to hear that, Rossi, and yeah, thank you very much. Gerbasia, do you want to add something about this discussion? What are the main challenges?
Por favor, tradúceme al español.
Ok. Estaba preguntándote, Gerbasia, ¿cuáles son como las principales dificultades que tú observas más allá de, en tu caso, de los documentos legales que no tienes, pensando en general para la educación de las personas refugiadas y migrantes? ¿Cuáles son esos problemas que enfrentan?
Para mí, los problemas que enfrentan las personas migrantes y refugiados, especialmente en este país, es la no continuidad de estudios por motivos económicos. Porque si bien es cierto que desde la primaria hasta el bachillerato la educación es gratuita, no es menos cierto que las universidades son completamente costosas. Acá la educación universitaria es costosa. Y para un refugiado que no cuente con medios económicos ni tenga posición económica, financiera para costearse los estudios universitarios, no podrá continuar estudios universitarios. Y como lo dije en el primer segmento, eso es algo muy complicado para un migrante porque se va a truncar su carrera, su vida profesional, sus aspiraciones de estudio, de educación. Eso hay que tomarlo muy en cuenta a nivel de políticas internacionales en cuanto a la educación. Cómo van a viabilizar el sistema educativo universitario para los refugiados y migrantes. Aunado a esto, los estudiantes que están saliendo de bachillerato, que han venido de manera forzosa, que no tienen documentos, que no tienen una regularización en el país, tienen dificultades para que les entreguen su título de bachiller por no tener una identificación, no tener una cédula de identidad que registre en el Ministerio de Educación. Muchos de ellos no tienen ni pasaporte, muchos de ellos andan solamente con una cédula venezolana. Eso es lamentable para los estudiantes porque no podrán obtener sus títulos de bachiller. Gracias.
Gracias, Gerbasia. And so now I have a question for all of you. And suppose that you have the opportunity to stand or to advocate for migrants and refugees education, and you have the chance to meet, I don't know, a person who had the responsibility to set policies for refugees. What could be your advice? Do what? Rossi?
Please, can you repeat the question?
Yes, if you have the chance to speak for the refugees education and suggest, for example, to the UN or a member of the state who have the responsibility to make policies for refugees education, what could be your advice? Please set 1 or 2 priorities, something that you believe is extremely necessary to have in education policies to reach refugees education.
Okay, I will speak French. Dans ce cas, en fait, moi, ce que je conseillerais d'abord, le Brésil, c'est un bon pays, un très bon pays où l'éducation est vraiment mise en avant. Donc ici, même si tu es réfugié, pour étudier, tu n'as pas de difficultés. Il suffit juste de faire un test où, quand tu seras admis, tu pourras étudier. Donc, il n'y a pas de problème. Moi, d'ailleurs, quand je suis arrivée, c'est vrai que j'ai traîné un peu, c'était juste pour la langue. Mais après, quand j'ai fait mon test, j'ai été admise, maintenant j'ai étudié. Mais seulement le seul problème, c'est que lorsque tu quittes de ton pays, tu viens ici avec un diplôme. C'est très difficilement reconnu dans des entreprises. Donc, ils ne reconnaissent pas ta profession. Ils ne reconnaissent pas ce que tu as fait là-bas et que tu amènes ici comme expérience. C'est difficile de reconnaître ça. Mais seulement, il y a de temps en temps où il y a des opportunités pour faire la révalidation des diplômes. Mais ce n'est pas très souvent. Alors, c'est que moi, je pourrais dire ou recommander au gouvernement, ça serait de multiplier de moyens de révalidation des diplômes pour permettre à ce que ceux qui ont fini dans leur pays d'origine et qui sont venus ici avec leur diplôme puissent aussi travailler au même pied d'égalité que ceux qui ont fini ici au Brésil. Peu importe que le diplôme ne soit pas un diplôme brésilien, mais seulement le fait qu'il a aussi l'expérience, que c'est lui qui a fini ici au Brésil, on peut aussi le considérer. Donc, vraiment, c'est ce que je peux recommander au gouvernement brésilien.
Thank you, Rossi. Thank you very much. Now, Nadreen.
Yeah. Actually, okay. As it mentioned in all international protocols and conventions, which is related to the status of refugees, especially in 1951 convention and its protocol, which was in 1967, that the refugees have the same rights and duties. So I want to remind everyone that the displacement and being a refugee, it's not a decision, and no one wants to leave his own country and go to another country learning another languages or another systems of lives. So yeah, therefore all immigrants and refugees suffer from the same problems, and they should receive the same treatment from all people. because recently all of us know that there are many discrimination cases in these days. So all people, I think, have to understand the laws, and the governments have to educate people that the refugees have to did or did not have another choice to do without being a refugee. So it's not a decision.
Thank you, Nadreen. And now, Gerbasia, do you have the question? ¿Tienes la pregunta?
Dímela.
Si tuvieras la oportunidad de hablar con representantes de los gobiernos o, por ejemplo, con las Naciones Unidas o aquellos que tienen responsabilidad de atender o responder frente a la educación de las personas migrantes y refugiadas, ¿cuál sería tu principal recomendación? ¿Que se enfoquen en qué?
Mi principal recomendación sería que en el sector educativo se enfoquen en establecer parámetros o convenios que flexibilicen los requisitos para el sector educativo. ¿A qué me refiero con flexibilicen? A que establezcan acuerdos internacionales donde exista continuidad de estudio universitaria a costos de migrantes, programas de Naciones Unidas para migrantes, para que tengan universidades donde se formen los migrantes y puedan desarrollar su nivel educativo, puedan dar rienda suelta a su vocación por una profesión, que no se sientan truncados por el hecho de ser migrantes, por el hecho de no tener cómo costearse una carrera universitaria. En ese sentido, yo pido, soy la voz de los migrantes y refugiados, para pedir que al sector educativo le asignen una flexibilización, una relación internacional entre países, donde los migrantes de todo el mundo puedan estudiar, porque no me estoy refiriendo en este caso a los venezolanos nada más, me estoy refiriendo a los migrantes de otras nacionalidades que existen, que están en la misma situación que los migrantes venezolanos, que no tienen cómo costearse una carrera universitaria. Entonces, en esa medida o en ese sentido, viendo que la movilidad humana ya va por los 250 millones de migrantes en el mundo, coordinen, establezcan ese aspecto, el sector educativo como formación de carrera para las personas en desplazamiento, para las personas que están en movilidad humana. Esa sería mi petición, mi propuesta.
Muchas gracias, Gerbasia. Well, I can spend the whole day asking you questions, and please remember today is a celebration because we are not just acknowledging the suffering of refugees and displaced people, but how brave you are, just taking advantage of every opportunity, your willingness to learn different language, to adapt a different culture, and succeed because you are really succeeding doing your master, Nadreen, just starting your career, Rossi, and doing your best to resume your teaching profession hopefully in Venezuela, as you had mentioned in our previous conversation. Now, I want to give the floor to all of you to make comments for our speaker or to ask questions. So please open your microphone and show your face if you want and say something or ask a question or a comment.
Continúa conmigo, Luis.
Con todas las personas que están en el evento, los estoy invitando para que hagan sus preguntas o sus comentarios. Please don't be shy. I am sure you have at least one comment or question. Madeleine, please go ahead. Over to you, Madeleine.
Yeah. Sí, estaba silenciada. Bueno,
Muy bien, ya
muchísimas
te veo y te
gracias. En primer
escucho.
lugar, quiero felicitar a la Campaña Mundial por la Educación por tocar un tema tan importante y realmente recordarnos que la educación es un derecho humano y por lo tanto no se le puede negar a nadie ese derecho. Está escrito en ¿verdad? Muchas políticas internacionales y nacionales. Creo que es muy necesario que desde pequeños en las escuelas aprendamos lo que es ser un refugiado, porque también hay migrantes al interior de los países. Y lo que ha dicho Nasri es muy, muy cierto. Nadie se va a otro país y abandona casi todo lo que quiere y tiene porque se le ocurre. Es siempre debido a una razón muy dolorosa y muy profunda que va a afectar su vida de ahí en adelante. Nadie elige ser refugiado, porque es realmente un desafío muy grande a cualquier edad. Me ha gustado el que hayan invitado a personas de diferentes edades a este panel, porque a cualquier edad la migración forzosa es dolorosa. Y creo por esa razón digo que debemos hacer algo en nuestros países para que para empezar, para formar docentes en enfoque de derechos. Eso es importantísimo. Los maestros tendrían que conocer todas las convenciones que existen y que obligan a nuestros países, ¿no?, a tener otra forma de comportarnos con respecto a nosotros mismos, los nacionales, y tratar a los migrantes como nacionales también, insisto, porque estamos hablando de un derecho humano universal. Así, creo que lo más impactante para mí siempre es el hecho de afectar anímicamente a las personas. Hay Gerbasia, ¿no? Vive ella y su nieta, como lo ha dicho, han tenido que superar probablemente una gran frustración con respecto a su propia vida y su desarrollo personal. El otro sentimiento tan fuerte, la inestabilidad que todos han mencionado, ¿verdad? El no saber qué pasará con ellos más adelante y el deseo íntimo muy valioso de querer volver a sus países y hacer algo mejor para que esas sociedades sean mejores. Yo quiero solamente agradecer realmente muchísimo a la sensibilidad de la campaña mundial personificada en Luis Eduardo por enfrentarnos, traernos estas experiencias tan ricas, ¿no?, para que deben realmente motivarnos a una mejor política nacional e internacional. Gracias, Luis.
Thank you, Madeleine. Thank you very much for your generous comments. And I am so pleased to have you in our call. And also want to highlight what you said, all the experience. People don't move because they want to try a new life somewhere. Of course, people want to travel. But in this particular case, talking about refugees, they move because the circumstances force them to leave everything behind. So I see now Maria Elena Urbina and Lerato Pizzo. Over to you, Maria Elena, and then Lerato.
Sí, muy buenos días. Muchas gracias a la campaña mundial por la educación, por esta oportunidad, ¿sí?, que nos da para conocer más y visibilizar esta situación tan delicada, ¿cierto?, que padecen millones de seres humanos en el mundo. Un poco, a ver, yo soy acá de Colombia y como Gerbasia lo debe saber, pues hay cantidad de migrantes venezolanos acá. En Colombia pues hay dificultades, ¿cierto? Dificultades porque también la educación no se considera como un derecho humano en todo el sentido, ¿no?, de la palabra. Y pienso que, o es realidad, que la educación superior es un privilegio, ¿cierto? También se da por concursos, se da por becas, y digamos que los mismos nacionales, ¿cierto?, encontramos muchísimas dificultades, digamos, para acceder, muchísimo más, ¿cierto?, para las personas migrantes. Y es muy triste conocer esta realidad porque nos encontramos talento, mucho talento humano, mucho venezolano y venezolana preparado y que están en unas situaciones muy complicadas, ¿cierto?, para poder subsistir y establecerse acá. Entonces, sus estudios no son aplicados en lo que la gente está preparada. No hay ese reconocimiento también, ¿cierto?, por esas carreras y eso también se da con los mismos nacionales que estudian a veces en otros países con la homologación y con el reconocimiento de sus títulos. Hay años que pasa el Ministerio de Educación Nacional, años, ¿cierto?, para reconocer y darle validez a un doctorado, que se hacen en otras universidades y en otros países. Entonces yo creo que eso sí es un tema muy esencial, ¿cierto?, en donde, digamos, la campaña yo creo que tiene mucho para aportar, dado su carácter global. Entonces solamente quería como mostrar un poco esa situación que se da acá también en Colombia. Gracias.
Thank you, Marilena. This is a really good point because, you know, we have been living for more than 2 years in the pandemic, and we have hundreds, if not thousands, of doctors with refugee background who will not be able to join the forces. I mean, being doctors and nurses in hospitals because of the legal requirements and all this stuff. So we are again missing talent. So Lerato Pizzo, please go ahead with your comment or question. Welcome, Lerato.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm calling in from South Africa.
Okay.
And I know as soon as I say South Africa, a lot of us are aware of the heinous treatment that we give our brothers and sisters from the continent with regards to xenophobic attacks and I think sometimes what we don't do is it's very hard if you are an ordinary person on the street to differentiate between a refugee, an undocumented person, or an asylum seeker. And I'm not saying it's justified, but you know, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, and that's what I deal with almost every day in trying to educate the ordinary person on what the differences are. Not everyone is here to exploit, but as Nadreen said, sorry if I said it wrong, nobody wants to leave home. But the reason I wanted to share is I heard what Rossi said, and I know we're talking about education. And I want to find out what the role, because I'm a pastor as well, I wanted to find out what the role of faith-based organizations. I'm not talking Christian. I'm a learned Christian because I know that there are different faith religions out there. But I want to find out in this case where we're talking education, but what the role of faith-based organizations are, because I think it's not going to be it needs to be a holistic and intersectional approach, because you know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I want to speak to Rossi, but I know it's going to be a language barrier. But you know, for her to be so far away and not have anyone to talk to, as a pastor at heart, it breaks my heart. So that's what I wanted to throw. And you know, the role of faith-based organizations. In this case, you just landed. Yes, you end up having access to education, but what about access to someone who you can talk to? That's me.
Thank you, Lerato. Thank you very much. It could be a really interesting topic for a next learning community to really address what is the role of faith communities. I personally know some faith communities in the context of the UK teaching language for refugees as a way to integrate them within their societies, and also providing kind of mental support. And just as you said, I am here, I had probably time, interest to hearing the voices of refugees. I want to communicate with them. So they attend a church, and there are interpreters like here for free, share food and all this stuff. And it's a kind of welcoming refugees and migrants to be part of our communities. And I do believe that is a good start, because you know the human being that is in front of you, learn about their experience and try to find ways to navigate the system, to enroll into formal education or to apply for a scholarship. Bordan, for example, today had shared something that is so important. Now, universities are competing for refugee study, for refugee students. And that is so brilliant, because, you know, people are I mean, universities want to compete to be the highest in the position. And now one of the key elements is bringing diversity into the universities. And refugees are doing that, and migrants as well, bringing diversity. I just have the opportunity last week sharing with Nadreen that they now call for refugees application for master's, PhD, and all this kind of stuff. And because the people we have on now, all in the call, have this ability to speak in different language, they are just very close to get one of these scholarships. And yes, we can all share this information with you. Now, Nora, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead with your comment or question. Where is Nora?
Buenos días. Bueno, les
Hola,
mando
Nora.
buenos días, un saludo muy cordial desde Costa Rica, en América Latina, Centroamérica. Bueno, yo quisiera reaccionar a la pregunta que en un momento hiciste respecto de qué le pediríamos a los, en este caso a los organismos internacionales, respecto de la educación y de las personas refugiadas, por ejemplo, las Naciones Unidas, etcétera. Yo lo que considero es que lo que se debe enfocar y lo que yo les solicitaría a ellos es que vean el tema de la migración en primer lugar, de las personas migrantes y de las personas en refugio como un problema estructural. No es algo que uno tenga que decirles a ellos qué hacen por las personas que ya están en esa condición. Yo creo que estos organismos deben trabajar el tema desde antes, porque deben reconocer la condición de problema estructural. Y necesariamente es un problema que tiene que ver con el sistema económico, con el sistema político en el que está inmerso el mundo entero, ¿verdad? Esta globalización capitalista en la que estamos. Y vean si en el tema de educación es estructural que la gran tendencia que hay hacia la privatización de la educación en todo sentido, ¿verdad? La estandarización de contenido desde primaria, secundaria, ni se diga en África y América Latina, ¿verdad? Que es donde más han llegado esas empresas, esas grandes corporaciones internacionales, sino también a nivel de la educación superior universitaria. El problema es estructural capitalista en el tema de educación y lo afecta ahí directamente por la tendencia a la privatización de la educación. Entonces, si no ubicamos eso como un problema en este lugar, va a ser imposible que los estados atiendan los problemas y las necesidades de educación, porque ellos también están abandonando su responsabilidad de crear condiciones para la educación superior de calidad. Eso es una tendencia muy fuerte en América Latina. En Costa Rica solamente hay 5 universidades públicas y hay cerca de 80 universidades privadas que preparan básicamente en las carreras STEM, pero, y eso está bien, digamos, me parece bien, pero es más difícil tratar de identificar tratados internacionales para crear condiciones de educación si la tendencia es hacia la privatización. Y como la educación es un derecho humano, esto no puede quedar en manos de las empresas privadas y los gobiernos no pueden, bueno, sí pueden, pero no deberían generar condiciones de negociación con empresas privadas para garantizar la educación, que es una responsabilidad propia de ellos. Bueno, muchas gracias y mucho gusto saludarles.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you very much for making that clear. Yes, this called anti-privatization. Yes, and making education a business. So I'm wondering if somebody wants to say, add something, maybe a final comment or question. If not, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I just also want to thank you all the people who have been involved in the organization of this panel. I want to thank you, Dr. Burak Agaldai from Koç University in Istanbul, Mehmet İksanok Semer from Mardini University, Artutak University, for their support contacting Syrian students in Turkey. Also our CLADE colleagues, Laura Gianginetti, Nelson Lizarazo, and Giovanna Mod for their support contacting Rossi Camaggi, Congolese in Brazil. I wasn't expecting that. So thank you very much. And also for contacting Gerbasia Rodriguez and for being part of this panel. Thanks also to Manal Stugaitis and Ajud Bordar, UN High Commissioner for Refugee Denmark, and our colleagues from the Georgian Coalition who support me, bring me support, trying to identify Ukrainian students. I invite 2 students, but understandably, because of the war is ongoing at so critical level, they just decide not to be part of the event because mental health issues related to the process of the painful experience of narrating about the war that is happening now. But I want also to thank you those students who were willing to be part of the event, but at the end couldn't. And I want to especially thank you, Nadreen, Rossi, and Gerbasia. Thank you very much for making time for this event. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And we have made notes all about all the critical elements you have highlighted. It has been a pleasure to be in here with this conversation and hope to keep in touch and see you in the near future. Thanks the interpreters and my colleague Filani and Salma for all your great support organizing this event. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.